Okay, for this week's homework helps, I'm going to start off by going over a problem from the learning curve. This one has two production possibilities, one for Spain, one for Brazil, and it has something about Spain. Let me mention something about PPFs. The production possibility frontier shows everything that a country can produce if it's on its by itself. And if that's what it's producing, if it's in an autarky, it will be able to consume anything in there. Once that country engages in international trade, they have the option of being able to consume somewhere outside of here from what they were before. In this case, Spain imports 3 tons of iPhones, or 3 iPhones, whatever units those are, and exports 1 ton of lemons. So let's see, where would we put that in there? Their initial point is at point B right here. So if they export 1 ton of lemons, that brings it back 1 unit right here. We're right here. And they're importing 3 units of iPhones. That's 1, 2, 3. So this gives them, this point right here is where they're able to consume, which is higher than their PPF. And what is their gain compared with autarky? So how much outside of the autarky line are there? Looking at this, gain usually means an increase. I see 2 possibilities. One is you could look at that as 1 iPhone and 1 lemon. The other option you could go from, they could be producing at this point, but instead they're consuming up here. This difference are 2 iPhones. So either the ones we have here are 1, 1, or 0, 2. Those are the 2 options. Let's see what the answers are. 1 ton of lemons, 3 iPhones. That is not an answer. 2 tons of lemons, 2 tons of iPhone. That's not outside of the autarky line. 1 ton of lemons, 1 iPhones. Okay, this looks like the right answer right here. And 3 tons of lemons and 3 iPhones. Let's see, we know let me go back to where we were at. We're consuming at this point 1 ton of lemons, 3 iPhones. That would be somewhere along this line right here, which is what they're not doing. If you could draw lines as to what these are. If you did that, I mean, this line right here is where their benefit would be with that type of a trade, no matter where at any point they were at the autarky. So that's where that correct answer is. Okay, I hope that helped for that one. Let's take a look at, I wanted to go through a few of the homework problems. Now, let me go to number 2. Let's look at the comparative advantage. Looking at the question view. Actually, well, there's the answers. Let me clear these drawings. So why are these the right answers? The process of specialization in trade has positive net benefits and is therefore beneficial to everyone. The key word here, this says everyone, which negates this statement. So this statement's not true. Let me go to our slides from this week. Here's an example of exports. In the sense of an autarky, the level of right here is a consumer surplus. Once they start exporting goods, the new amount of consumer surplus is right here, which is a loss to the consumers. Granted, the producers go from just this area right here, Y, to this huge triangle. So they are clearly benefiting. They're winners with the sellers, but the buyers are losing. That's one of the problems with exports. What happens if you have imports? There are winners and losers here. In this scenario, you have the consumer surplus is this thing right here. Once you start importing, instead the consumer surplus is now this huge triangle. They are clearly winners in that. But what happens to the sellers? Under an autarky, they have this triangle right here, but now all of a sudden they start importing a bunch of goods, which competes with the domestic production. And now the producer surplus is limited to this much smaller triangle. So they definitely are losers there. That's why that first one is wrong because it states there's that categorical statement stating that it's beneficial to everyone. It's not beneficial to some people. There's winners and losers there. The next one, a nation will not have a comparative advantage in a product if it does not also have an absolute advantage in the production of that good. That is false. You could have countries, little tiny countries will still trade with big countries because both are better off. As long as only if there's a comparative advantage, then there are gains for trade. C, it can be mutually beneficial for two nations to specialize in goods for which they have comparative advantages and trade with one another. Yes, and when they do that, they'll be able to consume somewhere outside of their PPF. D, countries that specialize in production of goods for which they have a comparative advantage. Yes, because if they have a comparative advantage, they can trade if they're more wealthier in comparatively to the other good in one good, then they're able to trade that away and get the good that they're have a less advantage to a country that has a comparative advantage in the other good, and both are made better off for it. The last one, absolute advantage is a source of potential gains for specialization and trade. That is not true. Countries cannot have an absolute advantage. They can still gain from trade. If this word, instead of absolute, said comparative advantage, then that would be a true statement, but that's not what it says. So that is false. That's number 2. Let's take a look at question number 9. Change in domestic production. Swaziland, however you say that, decides to open trade with the world market for carbonated beverages and becomes an importer. The company graph depicts Swaziland's domestic supply and demand for carbonated beverages. Please adjust the company graph to depict this new reality, then answer the questions. So they're not going to trade unless the world price is lower than what they're not going to be importing any. The price per can for the domestic consumer, let's see, we can either move that up there. If they're going to start exporting, then if the question said they're going to become an exporter, we'd push it up somewhere in there. But because it says they're importing, that is going to lower the price. They'll be pulling in suppliers from outside of Swaziland. And so that gives us the new equilibrium. After the opening of the trade, the price per can of carbonated will decrease. That's lower than it initially was at this point, but now it's that point, however many units that is. But there's a lower price. And after trade, how many millions of cans of carbonated beverages will Swaziland import? Well, at this new world price, the suppliers are only going to be producing 3 units, or what is that, millions of cans. But the consumers are going to demand 7 million cans. So the difference between that two are 4. 7 minus 3 is 4. They will be importing a total of 4 million cans. Let's check our answer, and that looks like it's right. Okay, that's that question. Let's look at number 13. Import quota versus a tariff. Which of the choices describes how the effects of the import tariffs and import quotas are different? Some foreign producers receive some of the benefits generated by an import quota. Yes, that's true. Let's take a look at our slides, our PowerPoint. That has to do with this one. Here we go. With this one, we have this graph looks exactly the same for both quota and tariff. The difference is the quota, whoever holds the quota can collect the quota rent. That's area C. Most of the time, it's the foreign entities that are they're exporting from their country, but they're importing into the domestic country that collect on what that rent is. That's where the big difference is between the two. Okay, look at the next one. Import tariffs create deadweight loss, whereas import quotas do not create deadweight loss. That's only halfway true. Both of these will create deadweight loss. This area right here, B and D, are the yellow areas, are both areas of deadweight loss, which are manifested equally in both tariffs and with quota. The domestic cost of an import tariff is larger than the domestic cost of a comparable import quota. I don't fully comprehend that question, what it's saying, but the price will still adjust it. The only difference between the two is that the import quota rents go to whoever holds the quota compared instead of the government collecting the tariff. That's really the only difference between those two. And so I wouldn't say that one of those is larger. Anyways, I'm not sure with that, but that's not the right answer. Quotas do not affect the equilibrium price, whereas tariffs do not affect the equilibrium quantity. Both of them affect the price, and both of them affect the quantity. We have and they'll affect it just the same. The difference is who collects the tariff part. Without the quota or the tariff, you'll have that amount of supply, that amount of demand being produced. So we're resulting in that much amount of imports. By adding the tariff, that tariff just got reduced to this level right here. It just shrunk, and it will be that amount whether or not it's a tariff or a quota. And so that's why that answer is not correct either. Let me turn off this. Okay. And I believe that includes all of the questions I was going to talk about today. Let either myself or my TA know if you have any further questions about these homework assignments. I hope this was useful and helpful in understanding these questions a little bit better. Thank you.